All right, so today I wanted to talk about adaptation in fighting games, the act of actually adapting to your opponent in real time during your matches. This is something that's been coming up a lot in my coaching sessions. I've been doing a lot of coaching recently, which if you're interested in that, by the way, YouTube, you can find a link down to my Edify in the description. Check me out if you want to get some coaching sessions. But I've been talking to a lot of people, and something that's come up a lot in my lessons is like, how do you actually get better at adapting? A lot of people either don't really understand the concept in general, or they feel like they're too slow in the moment to actually properly adapt to their opponent. So I just kind of wanted to talk about like what actually goes into adapting to somebody better, what goes into improving your adaptation skills, like the ability to actually improve or rather adapt to somebody quickly. Because it's one thing to be able to recognize that like, oh, my opponent is doing X option here. How do I actually like get myself to adjust to what they're doing? And how do you kind of decide in the moment what it is that you should be doing against it in the first place? You know, you can recognize that like, you know, you're fighting Zato and they're doing a lot of 2S into Pierce, but it's another thing to get yourself to actually do the option and know what the option is that you should do against that. Now, the interesting thing about adaptation is that I actually think the main way you get better at it, the main skill that goes into getting better at adapting to your opponent, is actually something that you work on outside of matches. And what that is it's actually the same skill that you use to kind of analyze your own replays or whatever. You know, after you play your matches and you go to like look back and kind of critique your own play, the skills you use to do that are actually the same skills that you use to adapt to somebody in the middle of a set. The first suggestion I have when it comes to getting better at adapting to somebody is like, after you play your matches, go into your replays and watch a couple of your matches and start asking yourself in certain situations like, why did I do what I did in this situation? What was I thinking about in that situation? You know, if someone got away with, again, let's just take like the Zato doing 2S into Pierce example. If somebody is getting away with this, what were you thinking about in that situation? You know, why weren't you thinking about 2S into Pierce? What was it about their play that was getting you to think about other things? And then also kind of flip it around and think about it from your opponent's perspective. What was your opponent thinking about in the situation? Why did they do 2S into Pierce? Why did they think they could get away with it? When you're playing fighting games, it is so crucial to be able to understand the whys behind decision making. I talked about this in my learning how to learn video as well. But being able to like actually process why you are doing something as well as why your opponent is doing something is extremely crucial to fighting games. And it also comes into adaptation when you're actually playing in the middle of a match. The reason that they're the same skill is that you need to be able to, while you're playing a match, be like, oh, this Zato is doing a lot of 2S into Pierce. You need to be able to recognize that, which you'll get better at recognizing that when you have gotten better at analyzing your own matches. Because in your head, you'll have already kind of gone through this experience of like, what things do I need to look for when I'm fighting Zato? You know, and your brain will already be more acclimated to looking for something like 2S into Pierce. And you'll also have already gone through the process of trying to think about what you should be doing against 2S into Pierce. Being able to adapt in real time, a lot of it is already understanding what it is you should be doing otherwise. If you're trying to figure out on the fly what you should be doing to something, that is so much more difficult to do, and there really isn't like a great way to explain that. If something is just, you don't understand the answer to it, you're probably gonna have to go to training mode afterwards or like talk to people about it. Trying to find solutions to stuff like that in the moment is very hard. So when it comes to adapting, you wanna understand the options that are available in a situation before the match even starts. And then it gets easier to adapt because while things are happening to you, all you really have to do is recognize that it's happening to you and think back to when you've analyzed your own matches and think about what were the conclusions you came to do here. So like against Zato, my answers against 2S into Pierce is to press 2K because it will kill Eddie in this situation. I believe you can also do, yeah, you can also just jump out of it, right? So like these are the types of things that I will check out after matches. I'll like think about like, okay, versus Zato, they're doing this a lot. What can I do to beat that? You do all that research before the match. That way when you're playing the match, it's a little bit easier to just kind of identify that's something wrong and already pick one of the options that you've labbed ahead of time. Now, the other difficult part is being able to recognize what is happening to you in matches, because fighting games are so fast paced. You don't get a lot of time to like really process what's happening to you on the screen, especially when you are kind of like newer to fighting games where you're not as comfortable with your character or your options or whatever. When you're in that type of situation, it is so easy to just be overwhelmed when you're playing a match. But the reason I was saying that, the same skill you use to like analyze your replays or like think back to your previous matches, because you don't necessarily need to have the match right in front of you. I know back when I worked my normal job, when I worked at a grocery store, I actually spent a lot of my shift just thinking about my recent matches and things I could be doing better and things that are giving me trouble. So you don't necessarily need to have the replay in front of you, just kind of try to think about things whenever you have free time. But those same skills that you use to identify problems are the same thing that you do when you're actually playing a match. It's just, it's easier to develop them when you're not in a match. So hopefully that makes sense. The idea that like you carry over this skill that you hone outside of matches makes it easier to identify things when you're actually playing matches. When you're playing matches though, you also use the same skill where after a round is over, you want to ask yourself like, okay, what did I get hit by? And you want to try to quickly remember like key moments of what happened to you. It could be something like, why did I get hit by that jump in? Did I get hit by that jump in because I was overzealous in my ground game where you may be pressing too many buttons? Why was your opponent jumping at you? Did they have a particular reason? Sometimes people's decision making is just they felt like jumping, so they just jumped at you. And you had to be able to, you know, kind of decipher that in the match. But sometimes they jumped because maybe you've been using too many, you know, fire slashes or whatever, so someone looked to jump over your poke and then whiff punish you. That's the same skill you would use when you're analyzing your replays. You know, you watch your replay, you realize you're getting jumped in a lot. Why are you getting jumped in on? When you're playing an actual match and trying to adapt to your opponent, after the round or the match is over and the set, you think to yourself, why are they jumping so much? Why am I not answering it? What are the things that I'm thinking about and why am I thinking about them? And what is my opponent thinking about? It's the same process, it's just done much quicker because you're actually in the match. And it's easier to develop that skill outside of the match, and you'll naturally get better at applying it when you're actually playing somebody. Did y'all follow along with that? Does that make sense? The next step that kind of goes into adaptation is you kind of want to have a systematic way you break down certain situations, either between rounds or between matches or between sets even. Just like a couple of key areas in matches that come up a lot that you can kind of think back to and ask yourself like what went wrong here, right? So the most obvious one is just neutral. You know, you're playing neutral and there's a couple of key things you can ask yourself when it comes to neutral. Like after a round or a match is over, ask yourself, am I whiffing too much? Am I getting counter hit too much? Are my normals getting jumped over too much? Are you jumping too much? Are you getting anti-air too often? These are just like very obvious and key moments that you can always just think about between rounds or matches that you might need to do better about when you're playing. The other thing that's key also is to not overwhelm yourself with too many things. You want to try to find simple and only a couple of adjustments per round or per match. Because if you're trying to like adjust to too many things at one time, you're basically just going to put yourself in a situation where you're thinking about too many things and you're not actually going to adjust to any of them. So by having a kind of a systematic way that you look at either neutral or your pressure or any given situation in a match, you make it simpler to pinpoint things that you could be adjusting between rounds and between matches. But also when you're not overwhelming yourself with trying to adapt to too many things, it's easier to adapt to just a couple of things. And you want to have a way to like identify what are the more problematic things that you should be adjusting to. Everything that happens in a match, you can technically say like, oh, I could address that better. I could do this better, but some are more important than others. How you assess that is a little bit more dependent on the matchup. I can't really give you advice on that specifically, but you want to just have a couple of like key situations and moments that you try to identify where there's a lot of variance to what somebody can do, and everyone's going to have their own take on these situations. And the third thing about adaptation is that once you start playing fighting games more and you play against more people of different play styles, you get to start, I kind of always think about it like categorizing different types of players. So when you play against somebody and you start getting familiar with their play style, you can be like, oh, this is that type of player. I've fought that type of player before. I can adjust to them by doing X, Y, and Z. That is strictly just an experience thing that just comes with playing more, but that is something that helps you adapt, is that once you play certain types of players enough, it's easier to identify when you're playing a player that works that way. They either have the same way of thinking or the same way of moving. You know, some players might be very high risk oriented, right? They might want to play very fast paced, do a lot of things that are high reward but high risk. Once you start playing against players like that enough, it becomes easier to, one, identify when you're playing someone like that, and 2, identify what you're supposed to do against somebody like that. Going back to how the skill that you use to analyze your own matches is the same that you would use to adapt in an actual match. Another thing that's kind of beneficial about this is that you can go into your replays or whatever and identify a couple of situations of things that you could have been doing better, right? A couple of situations where you should maybe represent a different option than you have been. By identifying those situations that you've been struggling with before playing matches, whenever you're actually playing a match and a round or the match is over, it's easier to think about like, okay, that was that thing that I identified the other day while watching my replays that I've been struggling with, and it's happening in this match. You've already kind of pre-established that that's something that you have to be looking out for. So whenever you do that, it makes it easier to identify when things like that are going wrong in matches, because you've already pre-assessed that that's something that you have struggled with in the past. So it makes it easier to identify too, and also kind of address while you're playing matches. And my last advice for when it comes to adaptation is, I kind of mentioned it earlier, where you don't want to like overwhelm yourself, don't think about too many things. But when you're really trying to practice in a fighting game, and I mentioned this in my Learning How to Learn video as well, if you haven't watched that, you should definitely go watch it. You really want to just focus on one thing at a time. So if there's like something in matches that you've been really wanting to get better at addressing, just focus on that one thing and don't worry about anything else. It's easier to just focus on one point of something you want to work on and just work on that thing until you feel like you got better at it. Other skill sets might fall a little bit, right? You might not do as well about some other things that maybe you normally do well about, but it's fine because you're going to develop a whole nother skill set, a whole nother part of fighting games that you're going to get better at. And then the things that maybe you were good at that fell off a little bit, you'll be able to catch them up in no time. So don't worry about that. Go in, focus on one thing to improve on at a time, and just work on that. Is there anything you guys have questions about? Maybe I can show an example on how I'd analyze my own match. We'll use this as our set to kind of break down how I analyze my own matches and how I kind of try to adapt between like rounds and matches. This is a set that I played with Bean at Series E the other day. So the main thing I noticed in neutral was that Bean was using a lot of 5K, and I don't know how often I actually adjusted to it in this set in particular, but I use a lot of 2K when I fight Chip. When I fight Chip, it's a lot of 2K because Ram's 2K is just absurdly good, and it's just a strong button, and it beats 6 speeds. Right, a lot of people represent 6 speed when they fight Ram, so you do 2K, it beats 6 speed, you get a combo, whatever. However, Bean is using Chip's 5K, and Chip's 5K actually kind of like goes over Ram's 2K in a lot of situations. So I told myself while I was playing against him, I was like, okay, he's using a lot of dash up 5K, he's not really 6Ping very much. So because of that, I have to adjust and use my own 5K. Ram's 5K also does well against like his far slash and stuff, so I had to like tell myself switch to 5K instead of 2K. Which sounds easy, right? Like that sounds like, yeah, just press the different button. But that just goes to show that like in fighting games, even when it's as simple as just press a different button, when you're playing somebody in real time and they play so fast, getting yourself to press that different button is hard. So like, don't feel bad when you feel like you're having trouble adapting in maybe what seems like a simple way, because doing things in real time is never simple. It's always easier said than done. So I kind of just get smoked on defense. I started trying to use air movement to get out instead. This is like another adaptation I started using, is I started thinking to myself like, okay, so fighting this character, this version of the game, I can't really afford to get frame trapped as much, so I don't want to press buttons as often. So instead, I started telling myself, I'm going to look to use movement to get out of the corner instead. I'll start using dash block, I'll start using FD, I'll start using jumps and air dashes and stuff, and try to use that to get out of the corner. Because I would rather get hit for small amounts of damage instead of, getting wombo comboed by Chip. You can see here though, even though I told myself to start using 2K more, or using 5K rather, I kept pressing 2K, right? Which isn't like the end of the world, but just goes to show that adapting is not as easy as it sounds. Because I have previous experience fighting against Bean, I had told myself at one point, I think I told myself after the first game, is that Bean does this a lot. He will do air dashes. Actually, it might have been right here that I remembered, because he did air dash JD here. I might have told myself right now in my brain, because I had already pre-established that like I remember this person does air dash JD a lot. Them doing this like jump started my brain. I was just like, oh, that's right, they do this thing. So I immediately started looking for it, and I 6-speed it, right? So this is like a very, very fast example of adaptation. And I told myself like, okay, just wait for the air dash, and I did it, right? I bait the DP and Chip dies. And you know, like, just because you know your opponent wants to do something, when you're fighting an opponent as good as Bean, I can't just always expect that he'll constantly do the thing that I know how to address, right? He's gonna mix it up. And this time he was ahead of me. It's just like, you know what, I'm gonna do it again. I don't care if she tries to anti-air me. Now here's the thing. Why did I know that I should adapt to Bean using 5k? And why did I know that I should stop trying to RPS on defense with normals and instead switch to movement? Because those things are the things that were hitting me. When you're getting hit by things, that's your immediate sign of the thing that you need to be adapting to. I was getting hit for trying to RPS too much on defense early on in the set, and I was exploding for it, right? So that's how you use in matches, like how do you decide what you should be adapting to? It's whatever's hitting you. Whatever's hitting you is already your sign for what you need to be adapting to. Yeah, I think those are just some like basic examples of like how I go about adaptation, and those were all things that I did in matches, right? Like that wasn't something that I did in post. Those were things I was adapting to in the moment. But it basically just boils down to like, you just want to address what are the things that are getting you hit, why are you getting hit by them, you want to understand the logic behind all of it, and then just do your best to try to understand your options against those things and try to switch up your play on the fly, which is easier said than done, as we were talking about. Anyways, that's pretty much all I have to say on this topic. If you guys did enjoy the video, please let me know down in the comments below. Let me know your own thoughts on this if you have any questions or anything. I also appreciate any likes or subs to the channel. It really helps me out. If you guys want to come out and hang out with us on Twitch, you can find a link to that in the description below. You can also join our community Discord. I have a link to that in the description as well. But I think that's gonna do it for this one. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one.